Well, good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to the All Our Talent Legislative Summit. I'm Caroline Winn. I'm the CEO of San Diego Gas and Electric and the chair of the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce. We have an amazing lineup of women speakers leading today and talking at today's event, and they include California Senate President Pro Tem Toni Atkins, who co-authored SB 826, which is a groundbreaking law that requires corporate boards to have equitable and gender diverse representation. We also have California Treasurer Fiona, who has recently teamed up with the 30% Coalition to accelerate the number of women named to public company boards of California. We also have with us Dr. Nicole Mason, who is the CEO of the Institute for Women's Research, Policy Research, and who is a leading voice on pay equity, economic policies, and research impacting women. And we also have with us Pamela Gabriel, who's the Senior Vice President and the Market Manager for Bank of America, who is leading her company's effort to advance women in leadership. So I just want to thank all of you for being here today. It is truly an honor to have you with us, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be able to share your thoughts and your leadership. You know, some of you may be aware earlier this year, the Chamber kicked off the All Our Talent Women on Boards and Commissions initiative, and it was really intended to bring gender diversity and parity to San Diego's center of power in the businesses, in government, and in nonprofit communities. And in June, we launched a webinar to launch the event along with California's first partner, Jennifer Siebel-Newsom, and Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis. And given the entrenched racial disparities in our society, which has been further underscored by recent events, I feel even more strongly than ever, I have more resolve about the need to cultivate and encourage women, and in particular, women of color, to take on more leadership roles. You know, we need diverse voices from all walks of life to help us build a more just and equitable society, as well as a more prosperous economy. Now, research shows that companies and organizations with gender diverse boards perform better financially, and they enjoy a competitive advantage. You know, research also shows that there's positive correlation between gender diverse boards and a company's social responsibility and environmental sustainability. You know, since the launch of the initiative about 3 months ago, I'm really happy to report that we have received overwhelmingly positive responses from our community. And many of you have reached out to me personally to offer your support for this important work. So thank you. And to date, several hundred women have completed a survey with the Chamber indicating their interest on serving on boards and commissions. You know, in October, the Chamber will launch a database of women interested in serving on boards and commissions and assist companies and organizations with access to that database. And the database is a little bit like maybe Match.com, where we want to help match women who have particular interests and qualifications with organizations that are really seeking candidates with the same attributes. You know, there are many, many talented women out there, but often they're really untapped for opportunities to serve on boards and commissions because maybe they're not part of certain networks or they're not known to the people selecting them. And I think likewise, there are many boards and commissions out there that are searching for diverse women leaders, but maybe they don't know where to look. So we're focused on really changing this. And really, through this database, I think we can help build connections. I think we can fill in the missing links. And I think we can really make a difference. So I'm confident that we will make a difference because many of the major organizations in San Diego have really answered with a resounding yes when we approach them to partner with us to advance this initiative. So today's legislative summit is just another step forward in advancing the All Our Talent initiative. And I think the panel discussion will explore what policies are needed to increase the number of women in leadership, overcome the gender pay gap, and among other topics that I'm sure we'll get into. You know, earlier I mentioned SB 826, which was first signed into law about 2 years ago in September of 2018. So what should be done next on the legislative front to build on the momentum created by SB 826? And we welcome everyone's thoughts and support for this work, and we really need all of your help to integrate this important work into the core of what your organization does. You know, growing gender equality is an opportunity, and it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. But I really believe with sustained effort that I'm confident we will see fundamental change in our society. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is Pamela Gabriel. Pamela was one of the first people to sign on to support the All Our Talent initiative. And she's passionate about fulfilling Bank of America's environmental, their social, and their governance commitment to local communities. She's really at the heart and the soul of B of A's charitable efforts in support of local nonprofit organizations that really reflect local priorities and focus on making a positive impact for underserved communities. So without further ado, please help me welcome Pamela. Pamela.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. It is such an honor to be here with all of you today and to be a part of such a wonderful panel of such phenomenal women. As Carolyn mentioned, in my particular role, I have the opportunity to oversee our strategic investments, which includes wonderful partnerships just like the one that we have with the San Diego Chamber. For Bank of America, this partnership is a natural extension for the company's long-term commitment to diversity, especially supporting women. Being a diverse and inclusive company makes us stronger, and it's essential to our ability to deliver for our clients, communities, and our associates. Our ongoing work for our investment into women includes making sure that Bank of America is a great place to work for our female employees, which then allows them to ensure that they're enriching the financial lives of not only our female clients, but all clients throughout the world. All of that put together allows us to really economically empower the advancement of women all throughout the globe. I'm proud to say that Bank of America has women leadership all throughout its levels. Starting with our board, we have 35% representation of women, and across our global workforce, we are represented 50% strong and more. To effectively remove barriers to equality and create meaningful progress, it's important for us to focus and address areas where systemic long-term gaps have and continue to exist, which is why our partnership with the San Diego Chamber is so meaningful. It enables us to ensure that women in San Diego not only have the platform for their voices to be heard, but it provides them with the tools, the networks, and the pathways to increase our women leadership here in our own community. With that, I just really want to thank again the San Diego Chamber as well as Mind the Gap for all of the wonderful work that they're doing to make all of this happen. It is now at this time and my pleasure to be able to pass it along to Jessica Grounds, who has been leading the All of Our Talent project with the San Diego Chamber.
Awesome. Thank you, Pamela, and good morning to everybody and afternoon for those of you who are in other time zones. We're so thrilled that you're here this morning. I just want to give a big shout out and thanks to both the Chamber and of course to San Diego Gas and Electric and Bank of America. Without the founding sponsors that we have to really put resources and investment and care behind the work of women's leadership, we wouldn't be able to do this work. And for someone like me, who's been working in women's leadership for over 2 decades, I can't thank the business community and the philanthropic investors enough for that care. It's a really exciting time as we pivot and talk about the importance of more diversity and equity and inclusion within our workplaces. And I am really proud to lead the All Our Talent effort with Caroline Winn, the chair of the board of the San Diego Chamber of Commerce. So today, as we're here to have this great conversation, and I'm gonna share a little bit about the baseline report that we released in June that Caroline talked about to sort of set the stage for the work we're doing here in San Diego, and I would argue around the country. I've really seen this amazing pivot towards cities taking leadership around equity and inclusion when we don't feel like we have movement and change in the federal government and in policy at certain at the federal level, what can states and cities do to make change and efforts where we know we need this? And so let me just share a little bit about the baseline report we shared, focused on boards and commissions here in San Diego. Next slide, Katie. We looked at 5 areas of board leadership. We looked at private company boards, public company boards, and here in San Diego specifically, we have 88 public companies. We have around 650 in the state of California, so this is a state that has a lot of public companies and a lot of business effort. Private company boards, as I mentioned, nonprofit boards, and then city and county commissions, which is really a neat combination, I think, of the different sectors and the different areas we need to see more women in leadership. And so our first statistic we have out of public company boards, as I mentioned, we have 88 companies here, but we really have a dearth of women. We don't have enough women. We only have about 23% of those boards are made up of women. This is pretty aligned with what we see nationally for Russell 3000 larger companies. It's about 20%. And so here in San Diego, we only have 23%. I will mention the critical mass percentage, which I think is always important when we look at the research. We really see the impact, if you will, or influence of women or underrepresented groups when there's a critical mass. And only about 18% of the companies here in San Diego have that 30% threshold where they maybe have more than 2, maybe 3 women on their board of directors. And so that's an interesting thing to look at. We are friends and grateful to work with Annalisa Barrett from KPMG's Board Leadership Center. And she's going to be coming out with a new report in early October, which will delve a little bit more deeply into the public company boards here in San Diego and what we're seeing around the adoption of Senate Bill 826. All right, next slide. Private company boards, I just have to say, we really have to think about these because we don't really know a lot about them. We know we have research that shows there aren't very many women. The most, a recent study by Him for Her and Kellogg showed that women were only, a very small percentage at about 7% of private company boards. These are typically smaller boards, family companies, and otherwise, and we just don't have as much knowledge about exactly who's sitting on these boards, but we know from the evidence we have that very few women are sitting on these private boards. And then let's go to the next slide, nonprofit boards. We're doing a little better on nonprofit boards, obviously an industry where we see more women in the workforce in nonprofits. We have in San Diego, for the largest companies, we have about 41% of nonprofit boards run by women, or excuse me, women are included in those board of directors. But we don't have a lot of women in those chair roles. And so when again, we're talking about leading the discussion and who's really making the strategic decision-making on the board level, we don't have as many women at that chair role within nonprofit boards. And then lastly, city and county commissions. We see here that the city commissions are doing quite a bit better on gender diversity. I will call out the city for doing a great job of actually looking at demographic data. They're tracking race, ethnicity, and gender, which is very unusual. We, just to go back again with when we look at the board breakdown and who is on boards, the Securities and Exchange Commission for public company boards does not require demographic information. We have to figure this information out by hand, looking at biographies and pronoun use. So we don't have a lot of transparency. We have to really encourage, I think, this tracking of data. And then again, just to county commissions, we have a little bit fewer, 35% of county commissions have women on their commissions and boards. So I would say we aren't doing fabulously in San Diego, but we're doing pretty consistently with what we see in other regions of the country, and just gives us a sense of where we need to go. So let me just give a couple more points before I introduce our distinguished panel today. Katie, our next slide. We are, with this project, I wanted to just be a little clear about what we're working to achieve. We're working to partner with efforts to identify places where women can sit on these boards and really help them to be connected to these opportunities. I think working with the business community and organizations that are looking for talent is critical. As Caroline mentioned, we're building a database of talent here in the region for not just public boards, but all of these different kinds of boards where women are interested in serving. But I think, you know, a place that is so important to us is we need to look at different women. We need to look at women that haven't necessarily been a part of the process, haven't felt included, being intentional about women of color, identifying groups that maybe their voices haven't felt connected to these board opportunities. We have the talent in our state and in the country, and that is not the problem. It's really being more intentional about bringing these women along, helping to support them and make them feel welcome, and also find these opportunities to show their leadership, which we desperately need in all of these efforts. And so today we have these great panelists, and we're going to talk about a little bit of a support, I would suggest, behind women's leadership on these different areas, which is policy. How does both public policy, but also policy within organizations help create environments where women can be successful? We know that life is quite different for women in the workplace. We know that our industries are pretty sex segregated still. Women are doing certain kinds of jobs compared to men, although that has gratefully changed enormously in recent years. We have a long way to go. And so with that, I'm really thrilled to introduce our three other panelists today. We have California Senate Pro Tem Toni Atkins. She is our local state senator and of course leader of the president of the Senate, which is so neat to have that kind of leadership for Southern California, where sometimes we don't feel as cool. No offense, Treasurer, to the Northern California community, but we appreciate that in Southern California. She represents the 39th district here, and she has been a champion for affordable housing and natural environment and healthcare and veterans and the LGBTQ community, of course, women. And so we're grateful so much to everything she has done. And very exciting in this conversation was the co-sponsor with Hannah Beth Jackson on Senate Bill 826, which is this groundbreaking legislation in the country requiring women on board. So thank you very much for being here. And next we have California Treasurer Fiona Ma, and she is of course responsible for our financial health here in the state, but she has been on the Board of Equalization and served in our state assembly as our amazing Speaker Pro Tem, and was the first Asian American woman to be in that role, which is so wonderful. And I've spoken to your team, Treasurer. You have been just dedicated to this work around women's leadership, and we're so thrilled to have you share more about what you're doing in the state and kind of where you see the next step of what we can do together. So thank you and welcome. And last, but certainly not least, Dr. Nicole Mason, Nicole Mason, who is an amazing, amazing researcher. Dr. Mason leads, she's the president and CEO of the Institute for Women's Policy Research in Washington, D.C., an organization for over 4 decades that has been really doing groundbreaking work on pay equity. She is an intersectional researcher and recognizes the challenges of women of color and women of different socioeconomic backgrounds, and really bringing to bear how do we look at the research differently to really recognize what we need to be doing. So we're so thrilled to have her from DC. This is the benefit of COVID. We get people from all over the country. And Dr. Mason was formerly at the Women of Color Policy Network at NYU's Graduate School of Public Service. And we're so thrilled to have you. So, and she's a Californian. We got a Californian in the house, by the way. So with that, I'm gonna start with a question for all 3 of you, which is, here we go. So I would love to hear a little bit, maybe a tidbit more about you. I got to give a little bit of your sort of public bio, but maybe something we can't read on paper. And what do you think is the biggest roadblock right now for women advancing into leadership roles and being successful at work? Any one of you, let's just start, see who wants to start. Who feels compelled?
Oh, I'll go ahead. Thank you. And it's so great, Jessica. Thank you for facilitating. It's always good to join my friend Fiona Ma and to meet Dr. Mason. And I thank the Chamber for this work. It's incredibly important work, and I'm not surprised with Carolyn at the helm. A little bit more about her during the AB 826 discussion. You know, I think what we do is very much shaped by who we are. I'm a native Virginian. I come from a military family, raised working poor. My dad was a coal miner. My mom a seamstress. So for me, it was always about issues of equality for poor working people. It's what shapes the work I do around equality for women. I'm a member of the LGBTQ community. We didn't have access to health care, quality housing. I grew up in a house with no running water. So all of those things, and I know this is true for everyone, we are shaped by our life experiences. And so when I approach policy, it comes from that perspective of those who really have no access. And in California, that is as true as it was for me in rural Southwest Virginia. And of course, watching my mother work doubly hard. You know, she would work all day as a seamstress and come home and do all of the work at home. And so I think this discussion is really important. And the research and policy work that Dr. Mason is doing, I'm interested to hear about, because we use those think tanks as we approach policy at the state of California. And the one point you made that I think is so important, diversity doesn't just happen. It takes hard work and focus. And you are so right. There are so many women willing to serve, but they've got to have a start and they've got to have support. Mm-hmm. And I think that as someone, I'm so glad that you're highlighting in the report, city and county boards. Those are starting points for communities that are not represented well to begin. And as the pro tem and the former speaker, I have the ability to appoint people at the state level. And I appointed Fiona Ma when she was out of office to the Film Commission. And she was an incredible voice. I will end by just saying that, you know, as someone, you made a point about it, and I think it's really important. Geographic diversity, communities that aren't represented, gender, LGBTQ, ethnic groups. And when we talk about bills, I'll talk about Chris Holden's bill this year that followed Hannah Beth Jackson, but I'll stop there and just say, this is such a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
So maybe I'll jump in next just to follow up on my good friend Toni's remarks. I am the oldest daughter of immigrant parents. We were both born in China, so politics was not part of our upbringing. I became an accountant because I was good at math, and I went to the Rochester Institute of Technology because they had a specific CPA program with a paid internship program, and graduated, moved to San Francisco, grew up in New York, moved to San Francisco, and worked for Ernst & Whinney in the real estate tax group. Stayed there for 5 years. There were not a lot of women no women in leadership, very few, kind of moving up, worked us really hard, decided to quit and start my own practice, and became president of a small business association at the age of 28. And that was the first time I got involved in politics and started to understand how important it is to be at the table. Number one, as a small business owner, we talk about small businesses as the backbone of the economy, but we all know, those of us in small business, how hard it is to run a business here in the state of California. Secondly, there were not a lot of minority and women that were in elected office or even represented on these different boards and commissions. So not only did I run the Asian Business Association, I also got appointed to the Assessment Appeals Board. And like Toni said, I really do believe for women that is a great starting point, because you start to understand Robert's Rules of Order, the sunshine laws, how to conduct yourself at a public meeting, what to say and not to say to the press and to the public and public comment. And so I did that part-time, heard property tax appeals, both for residential and commercial, and really had to wait for 8 years before I ran for the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, because my parents really did not want me to give up accounting and throw everything away to go into politics. But Now that I am on my 4th elected position, like Toni said, you know, you need to elect people and understand what their passion is. And as women, when we run for office, we run because we have a cause. It's not because it's our ego, because we want to, you know, increase, you know, our clientele or see our name in lights, but it's really because we really are passionate about what we're doing. I also, you know, sit on California Women Lead Board along with Toni Atkins, where we have been working closely with Governor Jerry Brown as well as Governor Gavin Newsom on making sure we have women in the pipeline to be appointed to his boards and commissions. And to Jerry Brown's credit, he always made sure he had 50% women board commissioners, thanks to the help of Mona Pascal, who was his appointment secretary, and our Governor Gavin Newsom has also committed to having 50% or more of his boards and commissions. So we are still out there promoting. And like Jessica, like you said, it has to be intentional. When we move up to positions of leadership, that is when we can make the most difference, as we saw from your data. Since I got elected to the state treasurer, I'm one of the 8 constitutional officers and have the ability to appoint my executive directors. My chief of staff is a Filipina. My agency now looks like the state of California versus 18 months ago when I first got here. So again, I think that is one of the barriers. There is a old boys network. They feel comfortable appointing their friends. And when we force them to appoint other people like women, then they appoint their daughters or someone that's related to them instead of going outside and looking at the outside pool. So I look forward to today's conversation and thank you for inviting me.
Awesome, Treasurer. Dr. Mason, we're excited to hear from you. Thank you so much.
So I'm really excited to be here, and I just want to thank you, Jessica, and the Chamber for inviting me here. And I just want to start out by saying that listening to Fiona and Toni, I just know that I'm in good company. Just hearing about their stories and background is just so inspiring to me. I am from California, and I grew up poor working class in Los Angeles, California. I am the first in my family to graduate from high school and certainly obtain a doctoral degree. Right now, I have, I'm a single mother by choice to 2 precocious 10-year-old twins, a set of twins who might pop in anytime now. So, you know, hey, COVID. And I, you know, when I think about even my leadership at IWPR, I've been in the role for about a year now. It'll be a year on October 8th. I am the first woman of color, a Black woman to lead IWPR, and also the youngest person to run an Inside the Beltway think tank in Washington, D.C. And so when I think about the roadblocks to women's leadership and my leadership specifically, one of the chief roadblocks I would say is opportunity and being allowed to step into my leadership more fully. I was speaking, this is just a small anecdote, I was speaking to someone and she was talking about my first year at IWPR and she's like, oh my God, you're on fire. This is just, you know, doing such an amazing job. And I said, well, I said, Anne, her name was Anne. I said, Anne, it's always, no, I said, it's always true. I said, all I needed was the opportunity. And I think when you ask women leaders, you know, what's the difference between them and, you know, stepping into the leadership, it is really being given an opportunity. So, and, you know, obviously there's some other roadblocks, but that is when the question, when you pose the question, that's the first thing that came to mind.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mason. And thank you to all of you for sharing really a little bit about yourselves, because I think, especially for us as women leaders, it's easy to look at a bio and just say, oh my gosh, she's so accomplished. How did she get there? But to really hear the story of how we all started, I mean, that makes you feel real and makes it feel attainable. For so many of you on the line listening to us, that's where we all started. And we had many instances where we didn't necessarily feel like we had that opportunity, but that's such an important point. Thank you, Dr. Mason. We're so thrilled to have each of your voices here to talk about this. So I'm going to start with Senate Pro Tem Atkins, because we are in a state, as we've been mentioning, that has passed the very first in the country legislation mandating women's leadership in the private sector on public company boards. Senate Bill 826, which was authored by Senator Hannah Beth Jackson and co-sponsored by our senator here, which is so fabulous. Senator, I'd love to hear from you a little bit more, like, is there any backstory about, I mean, there are a lot of stories about how that happened, but maybe what has surprised you about sort of, as it's come into be law, what you've seen? And of course, you mentioned the bill that's working up now around underrepresented groups more broadly. We'd love to hear a little bit about how this happened. How cool is this? Oh, you're muted. That's okay.
Thank you. Gosh, I'll get the hang of it. You know, there is a backstory, and as you said, this is a first of its kind in the nation, and we want to build upon that. But Hannah Beth Jackson had done a resolution to try to do this before, and everybody was opposed. This bill and the bill that Chris Holden did, 979, were really considered pushing the envelope, and we didn't have a lot of support for it. And so one Sunday morning, I was reading, you know, my cell phone and all the articles, and my spouse, Jennifer, was there with me, and the Me Too movement, like, blown up. There was a letter in the LA Times, and I'm reading this, and I'm listening to the stories, and a lot of the lobbyist women in Sacramento, and I looked at Jennifer, and it was 8 in the morning. I said, Hannah Beth needs to introduce that bill now. And I texted her, and I said, introduce the bill. And as the Senate President Pro Tem, I said, I'll co-author the bill. Because when you are a leader, a speaker, the Pro Tem, and your name goes on the bill, people understand that it has more weight. That's using your influence, and women should do that. And I did, and we still had difficulty getting it out of the Senate, and I had to coax a few of my colleagues who had legal backgrounds who thought it wasn't constitutional. And then, lo and behold, it gets to the governor's desk, and there is a Supreme Court nominee up for hearing, Brett Kavanaugh, and Jerry Brown, governor, who is an attorney, former AG, he just got irritated by what he saw happening. And his signing statement was, while this bill may be there may be constitutional questions about this bill, folks in DC need to pay attention and learn a lesson. And he signed it. So without that confluence of issues, I don't know that we would be looking at SB 826. And of course, you know, there are companies like SDG&E, Sempra, who set the tone for us and who witnessed and testified on the importance of this legislation in Sacramento when we called on them. So there's definitely a backstory, and never underestimate the ability of a moment, seizing the moment and taking the opportunity.
Well, thank you so much for that. And I think that's such an important point when we're all talking about change making, how much we can control, but all how much external factors really play into that. And you having the recognition that at that point, that's when the senator really needed to push forward that bill. I think we're seeing that today, right? With Black Lives Matter and with what happened to so many of our Black citizens. We're having a wake-up call around this conversation. Who is in power and who is in leadership? And I don't want to forget, you know, the cool little part of this connection, which is the research is behind us. It shows that companies are doing better when the diversity of our country is leading it. And so how can we communicate that? And we'll get back to that in a little bit after I hear from each of you a little bit more. But Dr. Mason, I'd love to go to you next. Your work at Institute for Women's Policy Research, which stands really at the intersection of public policy and what's happening for women's needs. What are you seeing right now with major trends and shifting? What's happening right now in the space of policy? I'd love to hear kind of your sense. And I've been reading some of your great work on pay equity, on women of color. So would love to hear a little bit more about where you see the trends today.
So this is really an exciting moment for our country. There's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of chaos and turmoil, but for us and for me, it feels like an opportunity for us to reimagine systems and institutions that work for most people, including 50% of the population. And so even policies that maybe 6 months ago we said were impossible, or it was no way that these things were going to happen, we're trying them. And because we don't have a lot of choice. And so when I think about women's leadership, that, unfortunately, that's one of the things we're trying in this moment is elevating and thinking about the power of women's leadership and what does it mean, or who do we need to be leading some of these charges. I'm really excited about some of the policies that are coming down the pike that we get to support, like the Paycheck Fairness Act. I'm really excited about your piece of legislation here in California about increasing representation on public boards. And I'm working with a group of other women's organizations and think tanks to be able to take those kinds of policies and, transport them all over the country and really start, echo chamber, because it's really what we need in this moment. And one of the things I want to just reflect back is something that you said about when women lead, it's not only it's not a feel-good thing, like, installing women into these positions. It actually is good for business. It's good for the economy. When women are leadership positions, both on boards and in organizations and corporations, they lead with their values. So the policies, the practices of a corporation or business reflect what women know to be true about their lived experiences in their lives. And we don't tend to leave people behind. And so we're in a moment where I think women's leadership is being elevated. I mean, we see in the COVID response what countries have been leading. They're all led by women. No coincidence there. And so I'm actually really optimistic about this moment, despite everything that's happening.
Dr. Mason, thank you for bringing all of those important pieces up. And it is exciting to see you're seeing it from the DC standpoint and the national standpoint and international. By the way, Institute for Women's Policy Research does work around the world. And I do want to just echo one piece you mentioned, which I've been reading more recently in research around women on boards. We see in the research that women really do lead with more equity and inclusion in their own ethos as an important thing to pay attention to. So when we're talking about the impact that we bring, there is research again in all of these elements beyond financial benefit. So Treasurer Ma, I'm excited to turn to you. You have this amazing platform in the whole state, right, in California, tackling issues of gender diversity. And I know, because I've gotten to talk to your staff about some of the work you're doing on building your own database of talent, as we're trying to do down here in San Diego. Would love to hear a little bit more about the conversations you've had with the private sector and others, because that's part of your role. Where have you seen maybe some pushback around advancing women, and kind of how do we better understand what the companies are looking for so that we can better communicate why we need to be working on this issue?
Yeah, so as state treasurer, I am the state banker. So I manage all the revenues that come into the state. We invest any idle funds, plus invest for about 22 local government units, and then also sell bonds for the state of California. And so when I come into meetings, when I first started, most of the people in the room are men. And when I walk in with my chief of staff, who's Filipina, it's very uncomfortable. And they have learned that they need to bring people of color, they need to bring women. And we have heard from the women at these banks and public finance companies that they were waiting for the promotion. They were waiting for their raises. And for some reason, they were always told to hold. And now, because we're there and they get invited to these meetings, and oftentimes my chief of staff will only talk to that woman. They have been elevated, and so they are very, very thankful that we didn't have to say anything outright, but just our presence there has actually helped many women get promoted. I also, thanks to SB 826, I started calling around after it passed saying, okay, who's got the database? How can women get involved? And there was not one organization that was tracking all the data, as you know. And so I just decided to just throw it out there. I issued a press release and said, hey, any women interested in serving on a corporate board, send me your resumes. And to date, we have about 400 resumes on file. We did an August training with the 30% coalition, and there were 400 women that RSVP'd. And so we learned that serving on a paid corporate board is very different from being appointed to a local board or commission or sitting on a nonprofit, that there is like some, secrets that women we need to know about to get, appointed to these paid corporate boards. We're also doing one on September 30th now, geared toward companies. Sort of like what you're focused on is encouraging and educating and inviting companies to seek more women and people of color, diverse boards, and how this is good for them and how we can partner in this effort. Because a lot of times we always hear, well, we can't find anyone. Okay, I mean, that is not an acceptable answer to me, that we can't find any qualified women for this position. So like all of you, I look forward to working with all of you on building this database. And again, we have to make sure that we don't hear that excuse that we can't find any qualified women to serve.
Thank you so much, Treasurer. And I just want to emphasize your anecdote about how transformative just you and your colleague coming into those places changed the behavior of the people who are coming to see you. They almost had this wake-up call, like, oh, we can't just be all white men walking into a room, right? To say, oh, wait. So that's so fascinating, right? Like just the sheer change and power of being in that leadership role. And that's something I've noticed and tracked for my career as well. So thank you for sharing an insight like that. So I'm going to open it up to all three of you. We'd love to hear a little bit about, so we're in the context, obviously, of this pandemic. And one thing that I think has been so fascinating, and Dr. Mason referenced this in terms of seeing these fabulous leaders of other countries, often being women, being able to tackle this challenge, this global challenge we have. But we have absolutely seen that the pandemic has exposed disproportionate impact on women, from the case of obviously the workplace and losing jobs, but also issues like childcare and which has really come to the forefront. So where do all of you see the next phase of that? Do you see other issues having more resonance, as the Senate Pro Tem sort of referenced, because we have this external reality that's pushing change happening? That issue and others, what do you see having traction that we can really start changing, or what should we be paying attention to for women? And I leave it to all of you. Would love to hear.
So I'll start off. A big part of our work has been, again, pay equity, but also making sure that women have power and influence in the workforce. And childcare has always been one of our touchstone issues. And it's an issue that many women have had trouble with, from women in corporate America to women who work in restaurants. Everyone struggles with childcare, but many women suffer in silence and sort of see it as an individual problem that they have to solve personally, as opposed to an institutional structural problem that keeps women from advancing in their careers and can thwart their career mobility. I think what the pandemic has done is sort of expose that the childcare system specifically was a broken system and not working for working women at all. And so many women have said, you know what, because some have had to not only work full time, but also take care, are still saddled with caretaking responsibility, have said, this is not working, it's impossible, and we're kind of fed up here. And so what I'm hoping for in this moment, when we get on the other side, is that we do have a childcare infrastructure that works for everyone, that we have policies in place at the federal and state levels that is able to make sure that working women have this the supports that they need to not only enter the workforce, but sustain employment. And that businesses realize that they have a role to play in making sure that, women have the childcare supports that they need. I mean, for a very long time, we have a very masculine model of leadership and also the workforce, or workplace. So, childcare is not the problem of your employer. But it is if you can't show up to work. It is if it thwarts your productivity. So I think in this moment, as a result of COVID, all that's starting to come into focus.
Brilliant, thank you.
If I could, I think I would like to add, I mean, there's an article in the Sacramento Bee today that talks about family-friendly workplace in the Capitol. And it's not a great article, but I'm proud of a piece of it. Culture change takes time. We are now starting to see our legislature reflect more the diversity of California, including more women. We have the highest number of women in the legislature than we've ever had. We have more Latina women in the Senate, more women of color. Of course, it takes work to keep those numbers up, but that article today talks about the lack of family-friendly policies, particularly for mothers. We are starting to have women in the legislature, men too, but women in the legislature who are having children while they're legislators. And what does that mean for their ability? We saw the Buffy Wicks live. She was there to talk about the paid family leave bill and my housing bill with her child. And when I became pro tem, we appointed Erica Contreras as Secretary of the Senate, the first woman to lead that CEO position and oversee the Senate in 100 years. Prior, the secretary was sort of a administrative assistant type. She leads the Senate, a new mother with her child when she was sworn in. She had already been underway looking at maternity pods for how to breastfeed and collect milk, refrigerators that are separate from normal refrigerators to store milk. The Me Too movement, she was the one. So I think the appointments we make, the people we put in positions of power, when you add that to the Women's Caucus, and to Dr. Mason's point, the Women's Caucus for the whole decade I've been in Sacramento, and Fiona will recall, has been focused on childcare. Not just 1 year, because we didn't want them to say, did childcare last year? The Women's Caucus came back and said, no, we're not done. That's not enough. It doesn't go far enough. So it has been an issue for the Women's Caucus every year, and we've extended. So those are the kinds of things you see that are different when women are in positions of leadership, because we tend to actually think about the whole piece. And you know what? It's benefiting the men too. I have a chief of staff who is male, and he has 2 children. And it becomes a thing. How are we supporting our families and being able to do this incredible work? And COVID has shown us that we've got more work to do to support the ability to do that while we're at home teaching our kids at the same time we're doing our job, etc.
Fabulous, thank you. Yeah.
And I just want to jump in and just recognize the amazing Toni Atkins. For those of you who don't know, she is the first woman to serve both as the leader, Speaker of the Assembly, and the leader of the Senate. First woman. The last one was a man, I think back in like 1850 was the last time we had one person serve as leaders of both houses. So this is an extraordinary time for us. And her chief of staff, Nick Hardiman, was my chief of staff. And so we share, that love for of Nick, who's doing an amazing job and raising a great family, and, really has worked under strong women. So he's amazing, and I'm sure his daughter is going to grow up to be an amazing leader. But what I've been focused on is access to capital. It is so hard for women, I saw as a small business owner, for women to access capital because we don't have, those connections. We don't make, a lot of money and have these networks of men that we can call to partner and put in capital and, sometimes borrow money from when times are tough. And so, again, I started out as a small business owner, and I've done about 90 webinars now, specifically focused on small businesses. And the good thing about COVID is that women now can hop on and hear the information for free. They don't have to show up someplace. They don't have to pay, a lot of money. And I know a lot of my small business women friends thank me, and I give them a heads up. I said, hey, if you can hop on this webinar, I think it'll help you. It'll give you some tips. And I just see this as a leveling of the playing field, this kind of Zoom type of webinars. I also started, my public service career fighting Prop 209 back when I was the president of the Asian Business Association. And then my first role, I had to implement all the new DBE laws once Prop 209, was enforced at the federal level. And then now Prop 16 is back on the ballot to repeal Prop 209. And until we, again, start accessing real data, right? Look at how hard it was for you to kind of figure out how many women sit on boards and commissions, because we're not allowed to ask those questions anymore. It really makes it difficult for us to find that equity in our society. So once again, I am back in there, and I am supporting Prop 16, because we know things aren't fair. We know things aren't equitable, but we have no data or statistics to even prove it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Treasurer, for bringing up such a good point too. And I notice as I go into workplaces often, both men and women sometimes have a false notion of what the leadership looks like because of maybe where their position of privileges or where they sit, until you show them the data and say, actually, that's not what we're seeing, until you actually measure this, where it kind of is an aha moment and a wake-up call. I do want to give a shout out to the first partner of California, Jennifer Siebel-Newsome. I'm very gratefully working with California Partners Project on data. We're going to be coming out with a report in October around the adoption of SB 826. So it's really exciting to see what the bill's really doing. There has been some great research already done by a number of our friends, and I know something you're tracking, Treasurer Ma, but to really see a comprehensive sense of where we are and how legislation is actually impacting our state in this wonderful way. So we're going to take questions in just a few minutes from all of you. We have this amazing panel, but I want to ask one more question. And by the way, I should give direction. There is a Q&A tool on the Zoom, and if you ask a question in that tool, please do. I will be taking questions from that section, and we'll be looking at as many questions as we can. But before I ask questions from the audience, I have one more for each of you, which is, what is your best argument for gender balance in leadership? What do you typically go in and say, this is why this matters? What's your go-to?
I'll just start, and I'll just say there is less ego when women are at the table. I'm just saying, I think we need more women in elected office. We need more women leading these companies and boards. It just, we bring a different sense of, camaraderie, collaboration, listening, compromise is what I believe women bring to the table.
Great.
Well, thank you. I would say that whether it's a stereotype or not, women tend to be more inclusive because we have daughters, we have sons, we have families, and we have to think about all of those issues. And I stole from the data related to this very issue, which is women are the ones that make many of the purchasing decisions for their families. So we are the consumers. So back to your point about this being a good business practice, it is a win-win for the economy, the business, and for individuals. And so, there's so many arguments.
It's awesome. Yeah, there are. That's it. There are a lot. Dr. Mason, what do you say?
So, I actually have stopped the business of the good argument about women's leadership. It's like, it's so obvious. We're great leaders. We're brilliant. When we lead, change happens. You get hired, all the things everyone said, but like, I don't, at this point, we've demonstrated many times over our ability to lead and lead in both huge and small ways. I don't believe it's up to us to convince people that we can lead. They need to accept our leadership and trust our leadership abilities, and move out of the way to allow us to lead. Like, we've already done it. We've already proven ourselves.
I love it. That is my goal, that I never again have to ask that question, really. But time and time again, it feels that way.
We always have to answer it. Like,
right.
why?
Right. We've already done this, but thank you for reframing that question in the way we really should be looking at it. Why do we keep having to ask it? So I'm going to go to some of the questions from our audience. We have this is from an anonymous attendee, and by the way, Elizabeth, I'm going through the questions now. She's on our team. How does one go about being considered for and later selected to serve on a corporate board?
Well, from our seminar that we did in August, we found out normally, maybe you apply, like if you're applying for a government job and there's like a vetting system and you have an interview process. To serve on a corporate board typically, or what I learned at our seminar in August, is that it's through referral. So someone needs to pull your name out and recommend to the board or the CEO or the board chair that you would potentially be a good candidate. Then they normally hire a headhunter, not to look for women, but to vet the women's names that have been submitted to the company. And so it's important that we network. We also need to let folks know that we are interested in sitting on the corporate board. So if you have friends or family that work or sit on the board of directors already, we kind of almost have to run a little mini campaign that we would be great for the company. And then you always, you have to make sure your resume fits the position that they're looking for and that you understand the company. So it's not just like, hey, I'm so great, look at me, but we almost have to like target which corporate boards we want to sit on and make sure that we lobby for ourselves for those opportunities.
Yeah, and I'll if anyone else, I'll add, just because I've been doing a lot of work in this space, there is a wonderful organization based out of Los Angeles that does work nationally called Women on Boards 2020, which is run by Betsy Berkemer-Creder, and they have a fantastic workshop similar to what the treasurer did, just kind of giving insight about what it is like and what does it take to serve on a public company board, but really working on women's individual kind of CVs, what they need to present, what are boards looking for. And so that's a great training for you to become prepared. But to Treasurer Ma's point, I think this is part of the stuff we're trying to tackle here with all our talent and other initiatives, which is, it's great to have this network of women who want to be there, but how do we help these organizations and companies find that talent also and recognize they need it? And so I think we need to look at both the supply and demand side of this problem. And we are seeing that with COVID. I would actually argue, I am seeing companies more aware of where they might have blind spots on their leadership teams because of what we've experienced. And we bring a lot of important skill sets to that place. But just to the questioner, I would suggest definitely going to a training and be a part of All Our Talent effort. But I really think we're also needing to help these companies be a little bit more kind of clear about what they're looking for. And so it's a great question, something we need to keep tackling. So let's go to the next one. Oh, please.
And public pressure, right? Bills like SB 826, I mean, those are really important to raise the awareness that the status quo is not acceptable, right? Toni knows, if you don't kind of mandate some of these, these changes or call people out or bring them, to testify in a committee hearing, then they just think it's okay what they're doing.
Can I add very quickly? I want people to be aware of Chris Holden's AB 979 because it gets to the point of expanding. You know, we want women on boards, but this bill, if signed by the governor, would be the first state in the nation to mandate that companies based in California have at least one board member from underrepresented groups. Now that would include Black, Hispanic, Latinx, Asian, Pacific Islander, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, Hawaiian, Alaskan. So by the end of 2021. So this sort of expands and gets to one of the questions I saw about Black leadership and Black women. So just wanted to toss that out there.
Yeah, thank you. It is really exciting to see that growth and that additional conversation. And I will mention a statistic we know which is public, which Annalisa Barrett with KPMG reported in 2018. We only 29% of California-based companies had 0 women on their board of directors, and we know that is rapidly been changed. And I know our report with California Partners Project will show definite change in that behavior. But to your point, you know, that policy is so important to really be a starting point though, right? Isn't it kind of a floor to the conversation? Because I think our ultimate goal is leadership to understand this shouldn't be done because it's a check the box activity. It's because it's going to make your company better. So I'm really hoping that's where we get more people recognizing the importance of diversity. So I want to go to our next question from Rhea. Rhea asked, do you have examples of childcare inclusive best practices?
Can I answer that?
Absolutely.
So I think there's, you know, childcare policies and practices in an organization or in a business, and then there's policies that I think we should be instituting at the state and federal levels. I can just give you an example of our organization, IWPR. You know, we didn't have a childcare policy when I first came on board. And so as a result of COVID, but I'd been thinking about it a bit before, we now provide all employees with up to $4,000 a year to cover childcare expenses, to cover travel during work. You know, the expectation that you have to travel for work and you're responsible for finding care with no support after hours, or even for COVID, sometimes it's during hours because you have to work where your children are at home. And so that's not only a COVID policy, but after COVID, we'll still have that policy in place for all of our employees. And it's those things, again, that comes from women's, my understanding as a parent, and putting in policies that I know that will help and support working mothers. At the state and federal levels, I'm really hoping that we can get to a place where we see childcare as a public good. And we start thinking about how we might subsidize universal childcare for families regardless of income and age of the child. I think that'd be great if we can get to a place like Sweden or some other countries where there's, a maximum amount that each family has to pay for childcare. That would be amazing. And so, there's just so many things that I think can be done both at within organizations and corporations to make sure that women, can stay in the workforce.
And if I could just add, I think our focus at the state level has been, to Nicole's point, access. Mm-hmm. We don't have enough access for working women, working families in California of lower income. So, universally, and that's why the Women's Caucus has been focused year after year after year. And of course, one of my favorite, I should be careful how I say this, senators, Holly Mitchell out of LA, used to, before she became an assembly member, run one of the largest childcare facilities in the country, Crystal Stairs. Mm-hmm. And she is the budget chair now. And so having her at that point to bring the money, the policy, and the real understanding of what it takes together has been really an important thing for California.
Well, and I don't know if Treasurer Ma's on. I wanted to make sure if she had any. Do you want to share a little bit about? I don't know if you have any best practice around the child care piece, but the other side to this, though, I'm just in the way in which I'm at least communicating with companies and seeing where they are. Some of them feel that they get it to a point, partly because they don't, but to a point, because partly because they haven't been in that role. How do we help companies see that this is about really retaining a better employee base, and this is what we need to provide? Does anyone have insight about what we can do better to talk to companies about why this matters for the health of their company?
So I know so I think it's quite laughable that these same companies who are having a hard time wrapping their mind around childcare access are the same ones that provide whole campuses for millennials to ride bikes and have cafeterias and sleeping cots, but can't figure out how to accommodate half of the workforce. And women are half of the workforce. And so, we can continue to make the business case, but I do think, just like the piece of legislation here about, there is a time where we start mandating some of these things and legislating some of these things, because we need to accelerate progress. And if we keep sort of trying to beg people to see the business case when it's quite clear, in fact, we don't need one more pie, one more statistic to tell people to do the right thing. It's time to legislate and mandate. And that's how I think some of the changes that we're talking about that we need both at policy level will happen. So that's, so I just want to say that.
Thank you. Wonderful. All right. Well, we have a question from Valerie. While California is always at the forefront, do you believe other states will follow suit and pass legislation that mandate women on boards?
Well, I do. I mean, I think, and I know that Fiona can respond to that. We have seen so many times where California passes a piece of legislation or a law, and it, because we are the 5th largest economy in the world. I need to check that stat post-COVID, but our treasurer will know. Because we are the 5th largest economy in the world, and business and technology, and people talk about businesses leaving California. California is the future. And so businesses know, it's why some of them fight so hard to kill legislation, because they know if it passes in California, they're next. And they'll have to change their business model throughout the country, not just in California. So we have that responsibility. We have that incredible possibility and the challenge, but it's also a wonderful thing that we're able to do, I think, for people all across the country, not just Californians.
Yeah, and so when I was on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, we have a precautionary principle, which means if something you think is going to cause harm, maybe we should err on the side of caution. And I got up to the legislature and thought, this makes sense. Let's ban phthalates and bisphenol A from baby products. And like Toni said, all of a sudden, more and more lobbyists were hired to kill the bill, because if we pass it in California, it would go nationwide. And we had a difficult time, but in the end, Arnold Schwarzenegger did sign the bill with the help of Maria. So we call that pillow talk, actually does work. And then what happened is Senator Feinstein put the bill into a federal statute, and then banning phthalates from baby products is now law of the land. So here we have our Senator Feinstein at the federal level being able to make policy happen. But sometimes, like gay marriage, how long did that take? We're trying to bank the cannabis industry. Even though 33 states have some sort of cannabis legislation, we still don't have banking access because it gets stuck in the Republican-led Senate, U.S. Senate Banking Committee. So it is really difficult, but as California goes, the nation goes eventually. So we will continue to fight the good fight on all fronts.
That's great. And I will just add on that great question about the ripple effect. And I feel so strongly, as coming back to California, I was 17 years in DC. And so it's great to be back to my home state and really see us leading in so many facets. There are a number of states that have taken up similar legislation, but not the same. Washington state has a percentage mandate that's going to be going into effect around women on boards for public companies. Illinois has done some interesting work, although the legislation kind of got funky at the end, sort of like ours, I think, which happens, right, in the sausage making of legislating. But that is going to require demographic tracking of boards, which again, as I mentioned earlier, the Securities and Exchange Commission has no requirement. When we're looking at the board breakdown of women and men, and more on race and ethnicity, which is so critical. We got to kind of figure it out on our own. There's no reporting. And so some states are moving in that direction. There's some conversation that New Jersey might be passing. There's about 7 states that have toyed with certain similar legislative pieces to ours, which is really great. All right, so I have another question, which is from Carol, and Carol asks, let me just read it. She agrees that businesses and nonprofits need to provide this support to women in terms of, I think we're talking about childcare and others. Large companies have a much greater resource to pay for these services, yet it's much more challenging for small businesses and nonprofits. Do you have ideas of how small businesses and nonprofits can afford this?
So that might be based on the comment that I made before. So IWPR is a small nonprofit. We're one of the smallest think tanks in Washington, D.C. And so, but I've believed that this is a value for us and a priority for us. And so, it was important for me. And I think different nonprofits, it doesn't have to be $4,000, it could be $1,000 or $500 or, but I think it is really important to lead with our values. And then the second thing I would want to say is that even in corporations where they have, progressive policies, it doesn't necessarily trickle down to people on the front lines, even in banks. So corporate people in the C-suite can have a different set of policies than, people in entry-level positions. And so even equalizing there. My hope is that we can get both private businesses and the private sector on board, but also working with states and federal governments to, see childcare as a, again, a public good and a right, especially if we want to make sure that women stay in the workforce.
I agree. And I think it's twofold. It is, COVID has highlighted something that is critical for employers as well as families in a way that maybe as employers we didn't have to think about before, but now it's impacting our bottom line because the practicality of what families are having to do to care for their families and their vulnerable other family members, do the job and educate the kids or oversee that distance learning. So, I mean, it's an opportunity for us to figure out now, we're doing it in the middle of now an economic crisis, and the state of California went from a $26 billion reserve and surplus to a $54 billion hole that we've had to fill. On the other hand, to Dr. Mason's point, it is a value statement. So whether you give 500, 1,000, it really is something important to state. If we do really care about families and support for families, we keep saying this as good progressives, we need to put our money where our mouth is and support families. Having said that, I know that we'll continue to look at ways legislatively and budget-wise to add to the next level and the next level and the next level. And some of it will be mandating for those companies who can do it, just like we've done with paid family leave.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to just pitch a couple of my programs here at the Treasurer's Office. Cal Savers, which was a bill passed by Senator De Leon, co-sponsored by my predecessor, John Chung, really tries to set up a savings account, a retirement savings account for those employees who are not offered a retirement plan. And we heard that a lot with small businesses, that they would love to provide health care and retirement, but they also have to pay for, workers' comp and all these other expenses. So the legislature, took the leadership and created this Cal Savers account that would allow folks to deduct a certain amount out of their paycheck and start saving for their future. Similarly, I chair the Scholarshare 529 program, which encourages folks to open up an account to save for their child's college savings or their grandchild, and you can actually gift money. Other people can gift money to these accounts, and it's a great way to make sure that they don't have high student loan debt when they graduate. And then the last new program that we started was Cal Able. Those folks with a disability diagnosed before the age of 26 can now save up to $15,000 in their own account without jeopardizing some of the other benefits that they have. And we are working with Congress to try to expand the age of disability to 46 years old, because some people get disabled later on in life, right? Folks who are in the military, people that get into an accident and have some sort of, health condition later on. And we should also be able to save for our retirement and save for a rainy day, and also to pay for things like childcare and long-term disability insurance. I'm working on that with the AARP right now because it is so expensive, but some of us may need it, and we have to start thinking about the future and planning ahead.
Absolutely. And that brings up such a good point too, because when we talk about, I said family considerations on my slide, because I think about elder care too. I mean, as our population ages, and I've had a situation where my mom was sick at one point and I had to fly back and forth from DC to the West Coast. And anyway, life happens, and for our recognition that it falls on us as women still. And so how does legislation, but our organizations support us through that? I think it's such an important conversation. Well, I don't have any more big open questions now from the audience, but just to wrap up, because I think this has been such a rich conversation. I'd love to end on a positive note, as I always like to, and also a real practical note, which is any final reflections on this and a call to action. So all of us are, working as best we can in our little Zoom lives, and what could we be doing? What should all of us be doing on the phone? Hopefully a lot of us are going to be thinking about joining boards and commissions as we hope, but what other call to action can you share with our audience today as we bring more hopeful change for women in our country? I'll start with the Senate Pro Tem.
Okay, I always, as women, we want to let the other woman go first.
I know, I need to be a better moderator, my fault.
Well, I think really so important. My mentor, Christine Kehoe, opened a door for me to join her on the city council as a staff member years ago. And I think it's so important for us to lift up others and not just be the one to plow ahead. I've had great success. I am so fortunate, but I didn't do it. I did it because I had the support. And, I have an incredible staff. 70% of my staff in the Capitol and in San Diego are women. We make sure, my district director's on the call, and she participated when I was a city council member in Lead San Diego. Opportunities that you have to help others progress because we were given opportunities and we can. And even as my good friend Fiona pointed out, Speaker Pro Tem Barbara Boxer took me to task at a Gavin Newsom fundraiser because she thought that I was not leaning in enough. And she said to me, stop that. And, I'm like, whoa. And so it's a reminder. All of us feel like we just did. We need to step back, and I need to let one of you go first. Yes, let's be civil. Let's do that, but not at the expense of advancing causes and values and making sure that we're helping other women whose shoulders we stand on. We need to pull people up with us. So thank you for this opportunity. And thanks again, Carolyn, to you and to the chamber.
Awesome.
Jessica, I just wanted to follow up, because when you talk about leaning in, when I was termed out, I was going to run for the State Board of Equalization. And, when you're termed out, you're kind of persona non grata. And Toni Atkins, appointed me to the California Film Commission. I did not ask for it. She just appointed me. And I was like thrilled because I'm a SAG member, and I'm like, oh my God. But, Toni Atkins does lean in. I also want to just let women know that if you need a mentor, we are here, but you need to ask us. And you also need to tell us what your goals are, how we can help you. I always say, I cannot read your mind. So sometimes when, there's a race and a woman says, well, I was thinking about running, or I'm going to run. I'm like, why didn't you tell me? I didn't know. I already endorsed, these folks. So you need to get in there early. I would also say the census is coming up. The deadline is September 30th. If you haven't registered, please make sure you register. We depend right now on the federal government for every dollar we can get, and it's based on the census, and it's www.my2020census.gov. If you don't remember whether you did it, just please log on and check one more time, because it is dependent. We are dependent on the next 10 years on how many people we count. And then, of course, register to vote, even though there's a lot of issues on the ballot, and sometimes women go, I haven't had time to read it, and therefore I didn't vote. You know, vote for the things that you are passionate about. Vote for the people you want to see in leadership. You don't have to vote for everything on the ballot, because sometimes that's how we are. We're so diligent. We want to know every detail before we vote. We don't want to make the wrong decision, but just show up and vote.
Love it. Awesome. Dr. Mason?
So I just want to say that I knew from the very beginning that this was going to be an amazing panel and discussion. It has like far exceeded my expectations, and and both what Fiona and Toni have said at the end to wrap us up, is right on. And the only thing I would add to that, well, two things, is that this is our moment. There are more than 500 women who filed to run for office who are thinking about leadership, taking it up and putting themselves into the game, in the game. And so supporting those women leaders is really critically important. And for women who are new leaders, in addition to supporting them or supporting the people or reaching out to people you can reach out to new leaders who, it's their first time in a leadership position, and just say, I see you, great job. And you don't even have to know them. Some of the best notes I've gotten are from like women who just, see me or just proud, that I'm in the role, and they just say, keep going. And that just makes my day. And so I know that there is support, the last thing I'll say is that these jobs are tough. These roles are tough. And so there are days where it just feels like I just need a nap, or I don't know what's going on. And so having people around you who can support you and sort of remind you of why you do this work is also really critically important.
Thank you, Dr. Mix. You almost made me cry. I have to say also, I have so much utmost respect for you as a single mom. As a mother of a 2.5-year-old, when my husband is away, I don't know how you do it. And having two, I just so much respect, and to run an organization and do that is amazing. And thank you for being that role model for so many women, because we do have a lot of single parents out there that are raising amazing families. And Caroline, you're on. Do you want to just say a quick goodbye to our panel before I just wrap us up at the end? I want to make sure I give you.
Absolutely. Let me first say something, and it was something that Toni said that really struck me, and that was that she had other women lifting her up, supporting her, whether it be Barbara Boxer or Christine Kehoe. And then now Toni's doing it for Fiona, right? So as women, we have to lift each other up. And I think sometimes I don't always see women do that. So I would just say that's a general message for all of us. We need to lift each other up and pay it forward, because when it's done to you, you'll do it to somebody else. And so I think that's really important. But let me just say how thankful I am to this amazing panel. I would vote for all 4 of you if you were on the ticket, okay? Because you all are just the inspiration for so many women, the couple hundred women and men that were on this call today, that really support what we're trying to do, that really support gender equity for all the right reasons. And with this initiative, I hope that we're able to, again, connect more women to more boards and more commissions. And your lessons learned, your transparency, your vulnerability with our audience today was so impactful. So thank you very, very much for taking such great time out of your day and sharing your stories. It's making a difference. So thank you. And thank you, Jessica. You're a fantastic leader and a fantastic moderator. And we're so lucky to have you be a part and lead this effort for the Chamber.
Thank you, Caroline. Well, and I was so thrilled that you became the CEO of a big company while we were working together, right? I was like, woohoo, upward mobility. That's awesome, Caroline. So we need to get you on a public company board.
There you go.
California.
There you go.
But I just want to end by thanking you, all of you, so much for being a part of this. I know we're so busy in this time, and excuse me, it means a lot to all of us in San Diego and the country that you spent your time with us. And I think it was a wonderful conversation. I just want to give it a quick plug. We are building our database now. I mentioned already, we're working on some more technology that we will launch in later this year. But right now we have a survey at our All Our Talent. If you go to the Chamber website, All Our Talent, there is a survey, and we're collecting information. We want to know about you. We want to know what kind of boards and commissions you want to serve on. We're already building a database of I think we have hundreds of women already in our network, which is fabulous. So please sign up so we know you're interested. And as we roll out more of our efforts to really plug you into opportunities, we know that you're there and interested in serving, because we need your leadership. And as you've heard today, you bring your experience to bear as a leader. You don't have to have this check the box academic background, whatever you have done, you are bringing value to the table. And that's what we really want you to see and hear. So please check that out. I believe in the chat box, Katie has added that URL to do our survey. And we will continue on. This is not going to end. Senate Pro Tem, I'm already talking to hopefully our next, whoever our next leadership will be in San Diego, about how this can continue as both in the city and in the county, and I hope have ripple effects around the country, in the state and the country. So thanks to all of you. We're gonna sign off for now, but thanks again to all the audience, and we hope to see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.